I thought I'd buried my past when I left home for good, but one phone call changed everything. Growing up in a broken home full of secrets, Max never expected to return to the small town that nearly destroyed his family. But when tragedy strikes, he's forced to face the ghosts he left behind, an estranged father, a sister guarding deep pain, and a house filled with echoes of things never said. Growing up, I always thought we were just the poor family on the corner. You know the one. Peeling paint on the porch, rusted-out truck that never ran but Dad swore he'd fix one day, and dinners that mostly came out of a microwave or a can. I didn't think much of it as a kid. I thought everyone counted change to pay for gas. I thought spaghetti night meant noodles with ketchup and butter. But I was wrong. We lived in a crumbling single-story house in a forgotten part of Pennsylvania. It was me, my younger brother Dylan, and our dad. Mom walked out when I was 7. Dad said she couldn't handle the pressure. What pressure? I didn't ask back then. I just knew she was gone, and Dad didn't talk about her. Dad was complicated. Some days he was a ghost, other days a volcano. He'd sit silent for hours, then explode because someone forgot to rinse a dish. He worked construction jobs on and off, but his real passion was his garage, a dusty kingdom of old tools, lawnmower parts, and cigarette ash. The toolbox was his throne. No one touched it. Ever. One rainy Saturday when I was 15, Dylan and I were bored out of our minds. The power was out again. We were playing cards by candlelight when I remembered something. "Hey," I said. "Dad said if the rain gets bad, we need to check the garage for leaks." It wasn't true. But I was curious. That toolbox had been calling my name for years. I figured if we checked for leaks, I could sneak a look. Dylan wasn't interested. He stayed inside munching dry cereal. I grabbed a flashlight and crept into the garage. It smelled like motor oil, rust, and stale beer. I knew which drawer held the good screwdrivers. He kept it locked. But the bottom drawer stuck out just a little bit. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled. Inside wasn't a tool at all. It was a yellow envelope, thick with age, like it had been handled 100 times. On the front, in handwriting I didn't recognize, it said, "For Jason. When the time comes." Jason was my dad. I hesitated. I knew I shouldn't read it. But I also knew I would. Inside were 4 pages, written in careful, cursive script. I scanned the first line and my heart nearly stopped. "I never wanted to give you up, Jason. But your father left me no choice." The letter was from someone named Annabelle. The deeper I read, the less sense my life made. Annabelle claimed to be Jason's mother, our grandmother. But that couldn't be. Dad told us his mom died when he was a teenager. The letter went on to explain how Dad had been taken away from her, forced to live with someone named Charles, who I assumed was my grandfather. She said Charles was dangerous, controlling, and that she'd spent years trying to get custody back. She said she never stopped loving him. It ended with, "I hope one day you'll understand why I stayed away." That's when I heard the garage door creak. I stuffed the letter back into the envelope and shoved it under a pile of rags just as Dad walked in, soaking wet from the rain, his work boots sloshing. "What are you doing out here?" he barked. "Just checking for leaks." I mumbled, praying he didn't notice my shaking hands. He grunted and grabbed a wrench off the workbench. "If you're bored, clean something." That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Who was Annabelle? Why did Dad lie about her being dead? And what did she mean by dangerous? Over the next week, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big was being kept from us. I kept thinking about the sadness in her handwriting, like every word hurt to write. But I also knew one thing for sure: Dad had secrets. And I was going to find them out. I waited until the next weekend when Dad went out to help a friend patch up a roof. I told Dylan we were on a mission. "What kind of mission?" he asked, licking Nutella off a spoon. "The kind where we figure out who we really are." We tore through the garage. I found an old photo album hidden inside a crate labeled junk. There were pictures I'd never seen, one of a young woman holding a baby in front of a red barn. Scribbled on the back, "Jason, 1978. That was my dad. The woman must have been Annabelle. There was also a photo of a man in military uniform. Charles? I didn't know. But he looked cold even in black and white. That's when Dylan pulled out a box labeled taxes. Only it wasn't taxes. It was full of old legal documents. One of them made my stomach drop. It was a restraining order. Filed by someone named Annabelle Hayes, against Charles Whitmore, our grandfather. Suddenly, everything clicked. Dad had taken his mother's last name. He'd been hiding who we were all along. But why? Just then, the front door slammed. Dad was home, and we were still in the garage. I shoved everything back into the box as fast as I could, photos, letters, legal papers, my hands shaking the whole time. Dylan just stood there, frozen, like a kid caught sneaking cookies. I hissed at him. "Go! Go back inside!" But it was too late. Dad stepped into the garage, shaking water off his jacket. His eyes flicked to the half-open crate and then to me. "What's that you're messing with?" he asked, voice low, too calm. "Just cleaning. Thought I'd surprise you." I lied, trying to smile. He took 2 steps closer. "That box wasn't yours to touch." Something in his voice made the hairs on my arms stand up. Not yelling, not angry, just tense. Dangerous. "I didn't take anything," I said quickly. "We were just curious. That's all." He didn't say a word. Just stared at me like he was trying to decide whether or not I was worth the trouble. Then he turned, grabbed the box, and walked it out to his truck. That was it. No shouting. No punishment. No explanation. But something had changed. From that day forward, Dad barely looked at me. If he spoke, it was short and cold. He wasn't just mad, he was scared. And if he was scared, I knew I should be too. I wanted to ask more about Annabelle. About Charles. But I didn't. I couldn't. It was like a wall had gone up, and I wasn't brave enough to climb it just yet. A few days later, I got my answer in a way I never expected. After school, Dylan and I came home to find 2 people standing on our front steps. One was an older woman, maybe in her late 60s, dressed like she'd stepped out of a church directory. The other was a tall guy in a polo shirt, holding a manila folder. "You boys Jason's sons?" the man asked. I nodded, slowly. The woman's eyes welled up with tears. "I'm Annabelle," she said. "I'm your grandmother." My heart just stopped. I thought I was gonna faint right there on the porch. Dylan's jaw dropped. He looked at me like, "Is this a joke?" "I know this is a shock," she said, her voice trembling. "But I need to talk to you. Before it's too late." Just then, Dad's truck screeched into the driveway. He jumped out, eyes wide, and shouted, "Get away from my house!" The man in the polo shirt stepped forward. "Sir, I'm with Child Services. There's been a petition filed for temporary guardianship." "What?" Dad looked like he was about to punch a hole in the sky. "They're my kids." Annabelle was crying now. "You lied to them, Jason. You told them I was dead." I grabbed Dylan's hand. Everything was moving in slow motion. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Dad looked like a wild animal. The man from Child Services held up a document. "We're not here to take them today. But there will be a hearing. You've been served." Annabelle tried to reach out to me, but Dad blocked her. "Get off my property," he growled. They left, but the damage was done. A storm had been unleashed. That night was the first time I saw my dad cry. He sat in the kitchen with a beer in one hand and his head in the other. I didn't know whether to feel sorry for him or be angry. Maybe both. He finally looked up at me and said, "You don't know what that woman did. You don't want to know." But I did. The next day, I skipped school and walked 2 miles to the local library. I figured if Dad wouldn't tell me the truth, maybe the public records would. It took some digging, but I found an old court case. The names matched, Annabelle Hayes and Charles Whitmore. The year was 1984. The details made me sick. Charles had been accused of domestic violence. Repeatedly. But charges were dropped every time. Annabelle had filed for divorce, then for custody of Jason. She lost. Multiple times. Back then, the courts leaned toward the father. There was one chilling line in a court summary. "The child, Jason, was removed from the home due to emotional instability caused by ongoing conflict between parents." No wonder Dad never talked about his childhood. But there was more. Charles died in 1991. A car crash. He'd been driving drunk and veered off a bridge. Annabelle tried one last time to contact Jason. The letter I'd found must have been her final attempt. I went home with my head spinning. My whole life, I'd believed one version of the story, and now, everything was flipped. When I walked in the door, Dad was sitting in the dark. No TV. No radio. Just silence. "You skipped school," he muttered. "I know," I said. "I had to find out the truth." He didn't move. Didn't flinch. "You think you know everything now, huh?" "No," I said. "But I know you've been hurting for a long time. And I know you didn't deserve what happened to you. But we don't deserve to be lied to either." That was the first time he didn't argue. He just sighed and whispered, "I didn't want you to hate me." I sat down across from him. "I don't hate you," I said quietly. "But I want to know her. I want to hear her side, too." He nodded. "Once." Then he stood up, walked into the garage, and came back with the yellow envelope. "Read it again," he said. "And this time, finish it." I sat on the couch with the envelope in my lap, just staring at it. The same one I'd opened weeks ago in secret, now being handed to me by the very man who'd once forbidden it. Dad didn't say anything else. He just turned off the hallway light and walked to his room, leaving me there with the soft hum of the fridge and 100 questions buzzing in my brain. I pulled the letter out again, unfolded the pages, and this time, I forced myself to read every word. Annabelle's handwriting was neat and delicate, like she took her time with every sentence. She didn't just write about missing her son, she wrote about escaping an abusive marriage. She described how Charles had isolated her, how he convinced people she was unstable, how he used his influence to win every court battle, and how, after losing the final custody hearing, she was forced to leave town for her own safety. She wrote about watching from afar, checking up through school records and old neighbors. She never stopped caring. But she also never stopped fearing what Charles might do if he found out. The last page broke me. Jason, if you're reading this, I hope you've become the man I believed you could be. I know life has hurt you. I know I have too. But I hope, one day, you'll forgive me for staying away. You were always my light. That night I didn't sleep. I kept hearing her voice in my head, even though I'd never actually heard it before. Something about her words felt safe. Real. In the morning, Dad was already gone, no note, no explanation. Just his truck missing from the driveway. I figured he needed space. Or maybe he was avoiding what came next. A few days later, we got a letter in the mail. The court hearing was officially scheduled. Dad barely looked at it. Just tossed it on the table and walked out onto the porch like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Not to me. Not to Dylan. And definitely not to Annabelle. The day before the hearing, Dad finally spoke. I'm not gonna fight it, he said. If you want to know her, if you want to go live with her, I won't stop you. My chest tightened. We don't want to live with her. We just want to know her. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me but wished he could. You boys deserve more than I ever gave you, he added. And maybe she does, too. The hearing was held in a small courtroom downtown. We sat in plastic chairs, awkward and quiet, while a judge listened to both sides. Annabelle was there. She wore a dark blue blazer and clutched a folded handkerchief like it was keeping her upright. She didn't look at Dad once, not until she was asked to speak. She told the judge the truth. Not just about Charles, but about her regrets. Her longing. Her failed attempts to reconnect. Then the judge turned to Dad. He stood up, cleared his throat, and said something I never expected. I lied to my kids, he admitted. I told them their grandmother was dead because it was easier than facing the pain. But I see now that the truth matters more. If they want a relationship with her, I won't get in the way. The judge nodded slowly. Then, after a pause, she made her decision. Supervised visits would be allowed. No change in custody, for now. But we had a window. A chance. Annabelle sobbed into her handkerchief. Dad just sat down, silent. Afterward, out on the courthouse steps, she approached me and Dylan with trembling hands. I don't want to take you away, she said gently. I just want to be part of your lives. If you'll let me. I didn't even hesitate. I hugged her. Right there in front of Dad, the judge, and half a dozen strangers. And for the first time since I was a little kid, I saw my dad smile, not wide, not bright, but enough to know he wasn't angry. He was relieved. The weeks that followed were weird. Not bad. Just different. Annabelle visited once a week. She brought old photos, baby albums, and even a stuffed lion that had once belonged to Dad. Dylan took to her right away. He asked her questions like he'd known her forever. I stayed quieter. I was still processing everything. But I listened. And she never pushed. One afternoon, she brought a little tin box. Inside were faded Polaroids, a bracelet made of yarn, and a newspaper clipping. It was Dad's birth announcement. Jason Michael Whitmore, born June 9, 1978. 7 pounds 8 ounces. There was a picture of her holding him in a hospital bed, her hair messy and eyes tired but happy. I studied her face, and for the first time, I saw bits of my own in hers. Your dad used to laugh, she whispered. All the time. He had the brightest laugh. Loud and full. You'd never know it now. I didn't say it, but I wanted to. I wanted to tell her that I thought I heard that laugh once, years ago, when we found a possum stuck in the trash bin and Dad chased it off with a broom, pretending to be a superhero. That was the only time I'd seen him belly laugh. Maybe there was more of that inside him, buried under the past. A few months into the visits, Dad got sick. He brushed it off at first, said it was just a cold. But then he started losing weight. Fast. His hands shook. He couldn't hold his tools like before. I found him one morning, passed out on the garage floor. Turns out it was cancer. Stage 3. Stomach. When he told us, he didn't cry. He didn't even look sad. Just tired. I wasted so much time being angry, he said. Now I just want to make things right. Annabelle stepped up in a way I didn't expect. She helped with doctor appointments. She brought groceries. She sat with him during chemo. They didn't talk much, but they didn't fight either. One day, she even made him soup. He ate the whole bowl. That was the first and last time I saw them smile at the same time. Dad's illness changed everything in the house. The man who once stomped around yelling about missed curfews and dishes in the sink now struggled to get out of bed. His voice got softer. His temper faded. He started saying, "Thank you," more. Sometimes even, "I'm sorry." We took turns helping him. Dylan handled meals. I did the driving and pharmacy runs. Annabelle came by nearly every afternoon with something warm: soup, fresh clothes, a new blanket. It was strange seeing her and Dad in the same room, no shouting, no tension. Just quiet acceptance, like two people who'd finally run out of blame. One chilly evening, Dad called me into his room. He was sitting by the window, bundled in 2 hoodies, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. "I want you to know something," he said without turning around. I sat down on the edge of his bed. "You were right to look in that toolbox. I didn't think I'd ever forgive you for it, but it forced me to face stuff I'd buried a long time ago." I nodded, not sure what to say. "I kept you boys away from a lot of things I thought would hurt you. But I ended up hurting you myself. I see that now." There was a long pause. I didn't know how to be a good dad." He looked at me then, his eyes glassy. "But you're gonna be a good man. Better than me. I see it already." I didn't cry then. I held it in, like I always had. But those words stuck with me. A few weeks later, Dad took a turn for the worse. He stopped eating. Could barely speak. We knew the end was close, even if none of us wanted to admit it. On a quiet Sunday morning, with Dylan asleep on the couch and Annabelle reading in the kitchen, I sat next to Dad's bed and held his hand. He hadn't spoken in hours, barely opened his eyes. But just before the sun came up, he whispered something so soft I almost missed it. "Tell her I don't blame her anymore." I knew exactly who he meant. He passed away that night. No dramatic music. No final gasp. Just a slow, silent breath, and then stillness. The funeral was small. Just close friends, a few neighbors, and us. Annabelle sat in the front row with Dylan and me on either side. She didn't cry much, but she held our hands tight the whole time. Afterward, as people drifted off and the sky started to darken, she walked up to Dad's grave and laid down the yellow envelope. The same one he'd kept hidden for decades. Then she whispered, "You finally let go. Thank you." In the months that followed, our lives changed in ways I never expected. Annabelle offered to take us in full time, but I told her we wanted to stay in the house, our home. Even if it needed work, it was still ours. She respected that. Instead, she became a near constant presence. Groceries. Bills. Repairs. She didn't try to replace Dad, she just filled the quiet spaces he left behind with gentle support. Dylan started doing better in school. His grades went up. He joined track. I could see the weight lifting off his shoulders little by little. And me? Well, I found Dad's old toolbox again. This time, I didn't open it looking for secrets. I opened it looking for tools. Because the roof leaked. The stairs creaked. And the kitchen cabinet door wouldn't shut right. There was always something to fix. But now, I didn't mind. Fixing things made me feel closer to him. Like I was picking up where he left off, building something stronger. One day, I found a small, locked compartment in the back of the toolbox. I didn't remember seeing it before. With a bit of work, I pried it open. Inside was a folded photo. Just one. It was Dad, probably around my age, sitting on the hood of an old pickup truck, laughing. Not smirking. Not forced. Really laughing. Next to him was Annabelle, holding a wrench in one hand and a soda in the other. They looked happy. Free. On the back of the photo, written in faded ink, "Someday, I hope we find our way back." I guess in the end they did. A few years passed, and things slowly became normal, at least, our version of it. I graduated high school, then got a job at a local hardware store. Dylan started talking about college. And Annabelle? She never missed a birthday. Or a game. Or a Sunday dinner. She'd tell stories about her younger years, back when she and Charles first met, when she had dreams of opening her own bakery, before life took a sharp turn. She never sugarcoated things. But she always ended with a smile. "Pain doesn't define us," she'd say. "What we do after it does." Sometimes I'd catch her looking at the photo we framed of Dad and her laughing by that truck. Her eyes would mist over, but her smile stayed strong. I asked her once, "Do you ever regret coming back?" She looked at me and said, "Not for 1 second. I only regret waiting so long." And that's when I realized something important. Family isn't about who is perfect. It's about who shows up, even after all the damage, all the silence, all the time lost. It's about the people who try. The people who choose to stay. By the time I turned 21, the house finally stopped feeling like a museum of pain and started feeling like a place you could breathe in again. The porch was fixed. The bathroom didn't leak anymore. And the garage, that old kingdom of rust and ghosts, was now a clean workspace where I fixed neighbors' lawnmowers on the side. I kept Dad's old tools exactly where he left them. Only now, I used them with purpose, not just curiosity. Annabelle helped us build a new kind of rhythm. She wasn't just Grandma Annabelle anymore. She became part of our routine: coffee in the mornings, phone calls when we were out too late, and fresh banana bread whenever Dylan had a rough day. She never pried too deep, never tried to take over. She was just there. Then, one Tuesday afternoon, she dropped a bombshell over lunch. "I've been thinking about selling my house," she said between bites of grilled cheese. Dylan nearly choked on his soup. "What? Why?" She smiled. "Because I'm not really living in it anymore. I'm living here." I blinked. "You want to move in? If you'll have me," she said with a wink. It was an easy yes. Not just because we loved her, but because it finally made sense. After all the running, all the hiding, all the missed years, we were finally in the same place. We cleaned out her house that fall. It was like walking through another timeline. There were stacks of journals, shoeboxes full of old letters, even unopened birthday cards she'd bought for Dad over the years but never sent. Dylan and I read every one. Some were hopeful. Others were heartbreaking. But the one that stuck with me most was one she wrote the year I was born. "Dear Jason, you're a father now. I don't know what kind of man you'll become, but I hope you love him better than you were loved. I hope you hold him without fear. I hope you tell him the truth, even when it's hard." I sat in her old bedroom, reading that line over and over again until the ink blurred from my tears. Back home, we turned the guest room into her space. She insisted on paying rent, we said no. She insisted on helping with bills, we said no. So instead, she stocked the fridge like a restaurant and planted a vegetable garden in the backyard that she swore was therapeutic. She laughed more now. Cooked more. Danced in the kitchen sometimes, humming old songs. There were still tough days, anniversaries, memories, moments when grief snuck in through the back door. But we faced them together. Then came one rainy afternoon that changed everything again. Dylan had just come back from a college visit. He was thinking about applying to a small liberal arts school upstate. He was buzzing with excitement. I was in the garage fixing a weed whacker when he burst in with a soaked pamphlet and big eyes. "You gotta come inside," he said. "Right now." My heart skipped. I ran in, expecting a broken window or a surprise bill. Instead, I found Annabelle sitting at the kitchen table, pale and shaking, a crumpled letter in her hand. "What happened?" I asked, rushing over. She didn't answer. Just handed me the letter. It was from a lawyer's office in Virginia. They were contacting her on behalf of a woman named Eleanor Whitmore. The name hit me like a brick. "Who's Eleanor?" Dylan asked. Annabelle took a shaky breath. "She's Charles's daughter. Your dad's half-sister." We both stared. "She found me online. Said she wants to meet. She claims she has documents. Things Dad never knew." At first I thought it was a scam. Some distant relative chasing money or stirring up drama. But the letter was real. Stamped. Verified. Annabelle was torn. She didn't trust anything with the Whitmore name. But she also couldn't ignore the feeling, like something was unfinished. A week later, we drove to Virginia. It felt like a road trip into the past. Eleanor met us at a small cafe just off the highway. She was tall, elegant, and nervous. Said she'd been adopted after Charles's second marriage, grew up not knowing much about him until he passed. But a few years ago, while digging through some old boxes in her adoptive mother's attic, she found journals. Letters. Legal records. "You're Annabelle," she said softly. "The woman he wrote about. The one he called the mistake he couldn't fix." Annabelle's face went blank. "He kept a journal?" I asked. Eleanor nodded. "Dozens. I brought copies." What she showed us that day turned our history upside down again. Charles had known he was wrong. Deep down, he admitted he took Jason out of spite. That he'd lied in court. That he used Jason as leverage to hurt Annabelle. And he regretted it, terribly. But his pride never let him fix it. He wrote about the guilt eating him alive. About nightmares. About watching Jason grow up afraid of him. "He didn't deserve forgiveness," Eleanor said. "But I thought you should know the truth." Annabelle didn't speak much on the way home. When we got back, she went straight to her room. A few hours later, I heard her crying. Not soft. Not hidden. Full, open sobs that shook the walls. I sat outside her door, unsure what to do. Finally, I said the only thing I could. "You were right, Grandma. Pain doesn't define us. What we do after it does." The crying slowed. Then I heard her whisper through the door. "I just wish Jason could have read those pages." Life didn't go back to normal after the trip to Virginia. It shifted into something new. Something heavier, but also clearer. That visit gave us the missing puzzle pieces we never expected to find. Annabelle took a few days to process. She didn't talk much, but she moved differently, like the weight she'd carried for decades had shifted to a different place on her shoulders. Not gone, but not crushing her anymore. A week later, she came into the garage while I was fixing up an old lawnmower. "I want to do something," she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Something for your dad." I stood up. "Like what?" She paused. "I want to plant a tree." "A tree?" "In the front yard. Something strong. Something that lasts. He deserves more than a headstone no one visits." I thought about it. About the porch where he used to sit. The corner where his old chair used to be. Yeah, it felt right. We picked a sturdy oak sapling from a local nursery. Dylan helped us dig the hole. We took turns adding dirt, packing it tight, patting it down like we were tucking in a sleeping memory. When it was done, Annabelle stood back and whispered, "For all the years we lost, and all the ones we still have." That tree became a symbol. Of Dad. Of healing. Of everything that had once gone wrong and everything we were trying to make right again. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. I got a letter. Not an email. Not a text. A real letter, in handwriting I didn't recognize. It was from Eleanor. She said she was going through more of Charles's journals and found something addressed to my grandsons. She didn't know if it was meant for us, or if he even intended to send it, but she thought we had a right to see it. It was strange, holding a note from a man I'd never met but who had shaped so much of my life without my permission. I waited until the house was quiet that night, then sat on the porch and read it under the porch light. To whoever finds this. If you're reading this, I've already failed. I know that. I've lived with it for years. I took things I couldn't give back. I ruined lives trying to protect my pride. To my grandsons, whoever you are, I hope you've broken the cycle. I hope you're not like me. If I could say one thing to you, it's this: be better. Be kinder. And forgive, if not for me, then for yourselves. I didn't know how to feel. Angry? Grateful? Numb? I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of Dad's photo album. Some things don't need a place on the wall, but they still belong in the house. Months passed. Then a year. Dylan got accepted into that college upstate. We drove him out together, me, Annabelle, and a trunk full of overpacked boxes. I didn't cry when we left him, but I teared up when I got home and walked past his empty bedroom. Annabelle found me sitting at the kitchen table later that night, staring at the lamp Dylan always forgot to turn off. "You did good," she said softly. "I didn't raise him," I replied. She shook her head. "You were there when it counted. That's what matters." We were quiet for a while, then she added, "He's going to make a good man out of himself. Just like you did." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. A few months later, I got promoted at work. Nothing major, just a shift lead. But it felt good. Stable. Like the kind of life Dad probably never thought he could give us. I kept going back to that tree in the front yard. I'd water it, talk to it sometimes like an idiot. One day, I noticed a tiny bird had built a nest in the branches. Life growing out of life. And that's when it hit me. This story isn't really about pain. It's about the things pain makes us do, and the choice to stop it from continuing. It's about a man who couldn't escape the damage done to him. A woman who was forced to disappear to survive. A boy who thought keeping secrets would protect his kids. And two sons who had to grow up faster than they should have, just to make sense of it all. It's about rebuilding. Reconnecting. And letting go of the version of your family you were taught to believe, so you can make space for the truth. Now, every Sunday, Annabelle and I sit on the porch and drink coffee under that tree. Sometimes Dylan calls. Sometimes Eleanor sends a postcard. It's not perfect. But it's enough. And if I've learned anything from all of this, it's that enough is more than I ever thought we'd have. I used to think stories like mine didn't matter. We weren't famous. We weren't in the news. Nobody came to our house with cameras or notebooks. We were just another broken family on a forgotten street in a small town. But I realize now, that's the point. There are thousands of stories like ours, quiet ones, painful ones, messy and complicated and unfinished. And most of them never get told, because no one thinks they're important. But they are. Because every time someone chooses to break the cycle, to forgive, to stay, to rebuild something that was torn apart, that is a story worth telling. And I think Dad would agree with that now. One evening, a couple years after everything settled, I found an old cassette tape in the bottom of a drawer while cleaning out some of Dad's things we'd never fully sorted through. It was unlabeled, dusty, and barely playable. I almost threw it out. But something told me to listen. So I found an old tape player at a thrift store and popped it in. There was static at first, then a voice. His voice. He sounded younger, maybe from before we were born. His tone wasn't angry like I remembered. It was nervous. Honest. He was talking to himself. Or maybe to us. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. I guess I just needed to say it somewhere. I miss her. I miss my mom. And I hate how much like my father I turned out to be. There was a pause. I have a son now. His name is Max. He smiles in his sleep. And I keep thinking, maybe I can do it differently. Maybe I can still be better. The tape clicked off there. That was it. Just a single minute of a man trying to figure out who he was, and if he could still become something more. I sat there for a long time after that, just staring at the wall. Not because I was sad. Because I was proud of him. And because even though he didn't always get it right, he tried. And he gave me the chance to try, too. A few years later, I met someone. Her name was Rachel. She worked at the library where I used to dig through public records looking for pieces of the past. I guess you could say we both liked uncovering things. She was the first person I really opened up to about everything: Dad, Annabelle, the tree in the front yard, even the letter from Eleanor. She didn't flinch. She didn't try to fix it. She just listened. We got married under that same oak tree 3 years after we met. Annabelle wore a navy blue dress and held Dylan's arm as they walked down the aisle together. Dylan was already living 2 hours away at that point, working for a nonprofit that helped kids from low-income families. He gave a toast at the reception that had the whole backyard laughing and crying. None of us came from a perfect home, he said, holding up his glass. But we learned how to build one. And he was right. Because now, the house that once echoed with anger was filled with laughter again. The kitchen that once felt cold and tired now smelled like cinnamon and coffee every morning. And the garage, Dad's old kingdom, wasn't a place of secrets anymore. It was where I taught neighborhood kids how to fix their bikes. Where Dylan parked his car during his weekend visits. Where I kept my dad's photo pinned on the corkboard above the workbench. The photo of him laughing on the truck with Annabelle. Still framed. Still important. Still ours. One quiet Sunday, years later, I found Annabelle sitting out front alone. Her hair had gone silver, and her hands shook a little when she held her mug. But her eyes were sharp. Wise. You okay, Grandma? I asked. She looked at me and smiled. I'm more than okay, she said. I've lived to see my family come back to life. I sat beside her, just like I always had. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you never came back? I asked. She nodded slowly. All the time. And I thank God I did. We looked out at the oak tree. It was tall now. Strong. Its roots deep. Birds nested in it. Kids played under it. It cast a long shadow over the porch in the afternoons. I realized then that it wasn't just a tree. It was a reminder. That even the most broken things can grow again. That sometimes the strongest families aren't the ones who avoid the pain, but the ones who face it, forgive it, and choose to love anyway. So yeah, maybe we were just the poor family on the corner. The one with the rusted truck and the leaky roof. But we found something more valuable than money ever could have given us. We found truth. We found each other. And we built something stronger than the past ever tried to tear down. That's our story. Thanks for listening.